we're going to be examining Wolf, who was or is a controversial YouTuber. He's very anti-Disney, he's very anti-feminist, and he's exploring why Rey is a bad character. He's going to try to use Ellen Ripley in the Alien series as an example. Well, this is a good heroine, and this is the way that a female character should be written. But as we're going to see, he doesn't quite make his case. And we're going to try to use him as a paradigm case of what is kind of at the center of these controversies over, well, how do we criticize or not criticize these kinds of characters in these big budget films?
From the Alien franchise is fucking awesome. By far and away my favorite female character ever. The fact that she's female is never brought to the forefront, and no one ever makes it a point that, because of that, she's better than any other character. The difference between a character like Ripley and a character like Rey is that one is a naturally implemented character and the other is not. To compare, let's list all of the attributes of both characters to ascertain how exactly one is different from the other. Ripley's femininity is never a focal point for the story, but it is a natural element of her character. Sure, she jumps into a xenomorph hive and fights off apex predators in their own domain, but her reasoning behind it is profound yet very subtle. At the beginning of Alien, she's cool, calculating, and driven by direct orders, but at the end of the movie, when she inevitably breaks, all of her crewmates are dead, and the Nostromo is about to explode. She doesn't just make a run for the escape pod alone, she makes a conscious effort to keep her cat safe. We know that she is, or rather was, a mother, so the way that she treats Newt throughout Aliens and jumps into the xenomorph hive to save her makes sense to the viewer. We understand.
He just contradicted his own point there. He made out it didn't matter that it could have been a man, and then he's now talking about how she's being a mother, which is why she is a woman. Fuck. Did he not review his own work before he put it out and realize he'd made that mistake?
Her motivations, because although it's not the focus, her maternal instincts drive her to defend those she cares about. Inversely, Rey's femininity is the only character trait she has, despite the movie constantly trying to make a point that she's just as strong as everyone else, and her femininity also doesn't matter.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Where Ripley was codependent on her friends, Rey is so independent that she lacks any ability to come off as halfway likable. Her natural skill with the Force, despite having no training, her ability to beat a Sith apprentice trained by Luke Skywalker and even beat Luke himself in combat, her ability to get a triple kill with a single shot from the Millennium Falcon gun despite never using it before, becoming a better shot than a stormtrooper who had trained for years within seconds, discovering force powers she never knew existed, flying a ship she's never flown before, fixing problems on said ship she's never flown before, which honestly isn't even an actual fix, she just broke it.
That one point there isn't correct. There's a line of dialogue in The Force Awakens which most people miss because the two characters are talking and they're overlapping each other's speech. And when they've done this shooting thing, not in that scene, but they're leaving Jakku and they're being pursued by TIE fighters, and then Finn is manning the turret, a bit in the manner of Luke was manning the turret when he was aboard the Falcon, and he's using the guns to take out these pursuing fighters from the First Order, but the gun is jammed and he can't move it to track them, and so Rey does this maneuver where she maneuvers the ship so that she's the one that's kind of aiming the gun by having it pass along a vector where Finn will have a chance to just go bang and then it will line up and shoot it. It's not an impossible thing to do by any means. And everyone kind of thinks, oh, it's just too clever flying for her. Why could she have possibly done this? She's never flown before. Well, after that scene's happened, and it's like slightly on kind of thin ground in terms of credulity, they both come together in the corridor. He's come up from the turret, she's come in from the bridge, and they just got into orbit. And he said, that was great, that's fantastic, wonderful, And then it's like, how do you do that? It's like, I don't know, right? And at that point, people start listening. And if you pay attention, she's not saying, I don't know, in reference to, I don't know how to fly. She's saying, I don't know how I managed to use the Force, which I don't know I've got, in order to affect something that was a lucky shot, right? That's what the context of that is. And then, just in case you were in doubt about that, because it is open to ambiguity of interpretation, it's then reinforced by the next line, which you can't hear properly because Finn is talking over it a bit, but you can hear it if you pay attention. And what is said by her is, I've flown ships before. I've just never left the planet. Now, if you take
All right, so we've heard uncompetitive speak, and the stream he was in is long. It's like 11 hours, so I'm only excerpting a very small amount. He goes into much more detail. Like, he gives me some information I didn't know. Apparently, Ripley herself was actually originally written as a man, but they changed it. But the argument still stands where Wolf is like, well, her female identity is not central. But as Uncompetitive points out, he actually contradicts himself, where he does say, well, Ellen does have some motherly instincts, so her female identity is central. Otherwise, she wouldn't feel those motherly maternal instincts. So there we are. So the case itself is self-contradictory, so he's not making sense. But then he jumps into Rey and makes a lot of controversial statements. Now, he goes through that whole long thing about her being a good pilot, and he answers, if you paid attention to the scene and listened to the dialogue carefully, this is explained, and you just make some reasonable inferences about why she's a good pilot. That's the end of the story. And he's also jumping around with the editing. He's putting in scenes from The Force Awakens as well as The Last Jedi. But with The Last Jedi, she's had some experience, so her skill level increasing might make sense. Now, I think we can say his analysis of these things is very poor, but he makes statements earlier in his own video about objectivity, and I think that's the central problem here with a lot of this, whatever you want to call it, YouTube community that is very anti-Hollywood. And he tries to pull this card, well, we're not ideological, we're not sexist, we're not fascist, we're not racist, because we're giving, quote, objective viewpoints. I think they kind of misunderstand when people are skeptical of this argument. The argument, as I understand it, would be like this. Okay, you're proposing that you have an objective science. Let's call it Maulerology. Now, you say there's this science, but we want theories, models, axioms to prove that this is a science. We're never provided those things. They do, however, say, but if we just go with observations, we'll be proven correct. So they're sort of saying there is an objective science, but they never provide us evidence that there is an objective science. So it's kind of a bizarre argument. Let's make this claim, and it seems rather obvious. X and Y are human beings. Human beings, by definition, as an ontological issue, have fallible knowledge. Now, you're claiming you have absolute knowledge of Ellen Ripley or Rey or whatever, or about Alien or Star Wars or Star Trek, whatever it is. How is that possible? If you're a human being, by definition, you're going to have fallible knowledge about everything, including physics. I think they're missing really going through logic and philosophy of science carefully. This is not a hard argument. We have a hierarchy. Do we know that much about physics? No. Do we have objective knowledge about physics? No. When we say we have objective knowledge of physics, we're saying we have objective knowledge relative to other disciplines like biology, literature, history, geography, and so on and so forth. Those disciplines are much weaker. They have a much less factual basis. So our own knowledge of the universe is very small. So when we say we have objective knowledge in physics, it's very tentative, but it's much stronger than other fields. So it's not a contradiction to say that we have objective knowledge of physics and we don't have objective knowledge of physics. It depends on the perspective. From the perspective of absolute knowledge, we have very little knowledge of physics. Now, from the perspective of literature, we have way more knowledge in physics than we do in literature. And they don't seem to understand this very subtle but obvious distinction because they are claiming absolute knowledge. We have absolute knowledge of physics and absolute knowledge of what is good writing. Therefore, The Last Jedi is bad writing because the bombers don't make sense. Like, the physics of the bombers don't make sense. Therefore, objectively, this is a bad film. But our own knowledge of physics itself is very, very tentative and very, very unstable. So even if that were true, the person is making this claim to godlike knowledge, that they have the God's eye point of view. They know things that most human beings do not. But you're still a human being, so how do you have this knowledge? And they never answer the question. So they're claiming to be literally gods, but they never prove they are gods. And I'm going to make the claim, you're not God, so you don't have this absolute knowledge. So when you make these claims that Rey is a terrible character, but Ellen Ripley is a great character, it's like any other claim. It's very tentative, we should be skeptical, and proceed cautiously. But if that's the case, then we're back to, you could be, in fact, a racist, sexist, fascist. You just don't like this character because she's a female or she's a feminist or whatever. So your claim to absolute knowledge will not immunize yourself from this charge of racism or fascism or imperialism or whatever it is. But that's the kind of trick they're playing. Like, once we have this claim to absolute knowledge and we justify it, then we're immune. So even if we were racist or fascist or sexist, it would still be true Rey is not a good character. But here's the problem. You don't have the justification for absolute knowledge. So the case fails absolutely. You don't have the basis to make that kind of knowledge claim. You just don't. And if you do, well, that's pretty crazy. Like, what evidence do we have that they're either one of these people, Wolf or Mauler, are gods? We don't have any. So it's unclear what the hell they're saying. It seems like they are making a claim to absolute knowledge, but they provide no evidence or justification. And when they do make their cases with empirical examples, the examples themselves are self-contradictory. So it's very unclear what the person is trying to claim. It just seems that they do frankly start off with an anti-feminist agenda. They hate this character, and they're going to provide rationalizations for that position, which is their prerogative. But it's not knowledge, it's not objective, and it's not clearly objective observations. They're just very partisan observations. So I'm unclear how this person thinks they're not being ideological. But that's the claim, that, even if they were racist or sexist, they're not being ideological. What they're saying is true. But it does seem like their truth claims are bound up with their ideology, or so it appears. But we'll work on Wolf more and give him more of a chance. But here at this level, he self-contradicts himself and is making a complete fool of himself. All right, we're going to investigate further how we can and cannot criticize big-budget Hollywood films. Thank you for listening.